So I'm an engineer. I build things. And but obviously, people who build things on the internet, typically they nowadays, instead of testing them by getting together a testing lab, they just release them to see whether they work virally, and if so, what happens. And then they look to see whether they can make pots and pots of money by somehow harvesting this new viral thing. If so, they then they spin off a web startup, make lots of money, and then come back and finish their degree. Or if they don't, they just watch it with interest. But they very rarely do. One of the reasons we started saying people should do web science is they very rarely actually think about working out what might happen or doing when in that jump from the microscopic device that they made, the way they made two computers or two people interact, to what happens in the macroscopic. So when you look at the web from the sort of looking at from an engineering point of view, and particularly I like doing hacking together semantic web-based things. I think it's reasonable to think about what sort of a world are we trying to produce out there, and then I meet people, network scientists, and people who've been analyzing it, the thing, and they come up with these terms like, well, we found that when the web has got all these interesting scale-free properties. So that's the fact that lots of things out there on the web seem to have scale-free properties, and I'm going to use it much more loosely than I'm sure Luis would like me to. So, in other words, if you have a phenomenon, if you make a phenomenon which works over many orders of magnitude in a similar sort of fashion, even if it's got a little glimpse between people sending emails at a daily or a month, at a daily and weekly levels, but basically, if you've got something which works over many scales, even though it comes from a hodgepodge of connecting together different systems, like, for example, our political system works over many scales because it's been constructed. There have been different sorts of government have been constructed at different levels, and they kind of talk to each other. That I'm interested in things which do work over many scales, because I have a gut feeling that it's not only curious and interesting that we see scale-free phenomena, but I've got this hypothesis that actually there are ways which we haven't yet fathomed in which the scale-free is an optimal solution for our society. Certainly I know that from personal experience of working in a working group, that there's always this tension when you have a bunch of people who are really interested in something, in a new protocol, a new version of HTTP or something, and then you put them, so you form a working group, and the people inside the working group start making some documents, and these documents are in fact they use new terms, and they define. So the moment you get a group, you get this phenomenon that you get a new language, and the new language exists within only for these people. It allows them to communicate. It is only through making these new terms and making new language that we actually make any progress at all. And it's only by excluding other people from getting in the way, and often groups deliberately or not end up making very obscure language actually excludes other people, but the result is that they can get their work done, because there's millions and millions of people. For example, if you look at HTML5 has a very, very long document. I don't know but this certainly stops people outside the HTML working group, and maybe a lot of the people inside the working group reading it. But there are millions of people who have opinions on what they would like to see in the HTML spec. So in general, there's always this, with any group, there is, when you make a language, the language is two things. It enables things, and it's a barrier. So that you've got this barrier to communication. And when these people finish their work, then they have the job of then explaining it to everybody else. But it seems that this phenomenon we have to balance. We have to balance to what extent we have these barriers. We have to be gentle about them, and we have to have some larger ones, and we have to have some smaller ones. And so maybe when we're constructing our society, in fact, we need to balance the way we individually participate in things of different sizes, and the blend of, and there must always be a blend of groups of different sizes. And if you look at the world you're in, and you find that there is some scale which is not represented. For example, when you pay your taxes, for example, and you find there's some federal money and there's some state money and there's local money and there's a little money. Do you spend it in, how much? And maybe you donate to some international, something international. But when you look at it, you find in fact there's a huge amount of money which is controlled at the federal level, and then there's 2 orders of magnitude more or less before at the state level. There's very much less money. Bill Gates gave a talk not about the scale-free nature of this, but about state spending just at TED day before yesterday. And one of the things I noticed is that he was talking about how important it was to manage state spending, but the federal is a whole lot bigger. And there's 2 orders of magnitude between them, so there's nothing at sort of the regional level at all. And of course, it's famous. America is a little bit famous for that. There's not very much at the international level. How much of the money which you spend on taxes actually goes to be controlled at international level? Hardly anything. So now to go sort of switch violently back now to the semantic web. One of the reasons why I think the semantic web is an interesting technology, and one of the most difficult things to explain to a typical person in IT, who you'd like to get it and adopt it, is that actually when you send a semantic web, any semantic web message or any semantic web file, any little piece of RDF out there, in fact, the technology is such that you at the top you have a set of namespace definitions, and each of the terms within it. So the semantic web document typically is sort of subject, predicate, object. It's for each subject there's a list of properties, and each property is identified by URI. And within the same document, those terms that you're using to transmit the data are taken from multiple languages. So you can have a document which contains 25 little facts of information, and they're actually taken from 9 different ontologies. And each of those ontologies is social. It comes from a completely different social group. So if I had information about this talk, for example, the seminar, then I'd probably, the start time and the end time are they're basically, I can use the calendar ontology. So I can use standards from calendaring, which are very well known. If I use those, then that information will allow anybody to put this little piece of put the seminar onto a calendar. When I have information about people, I'd probably use the friend of a friend ontology, which is very well known. So that would allow anybody to pull information about this and put it in the address book. But then when I actually started to talk about the fact that there were talks and seminars, I'd go looking. I'd probably be more difficult to find a very well-known ontology. I'd probably find a few ontologies that people have produced out there competing to be used, or maybe I'd end up for some of the bits, and for some of the pieces specifically, maybe the number of the seminar room on Northwestern campus will be a little ontology I have to make up. So I've actually made my own little ontology specially for this, and for this message that I'm going to send out to you, and that it will only be, and maybe I'm just hoping that other people might find it useful later, but they'll only find it useful if they get together and agree that we're going to use this URL for the concept of the NYU room number, say. So this is different from the way anything else works out there. If you use XML, whenever you do and make a new application, you make a schema, and the schema is a complete language in itself, and it's got a certain set of terms, and you get those terms agreed within a certain community of a certain size, and that's it. And the semantic web stuff is different, that you've got one message which is partially understood by a very, very large number of people, and then it is, it's partially understood by lots of people and largely understood by a very small number of people. So if you like it, the message takes a sort of slice through sort of the languages used by different communities. So this is how the semantic web is supposed to work. But how can we make that happen? How can we take advantage of that? And if you actually look at the way somebody fills in puts this information into a computer, they don't use a semantic web application at all. They'll put something into the calendar, and so what will happen is all the information that goes out will just be in the calendar ontology, and it won't have any information about who's giving the talks or which room it's in, so on. So lots of people have played with generic semantic web browsers, and so to just focus. So I'd like to focus just as an example of sort of engineering something to be aware of different scales. I'd like to focus on one particular example. So one particular example is that supposing we're building a user interface for somebody who's going to tell the world something. They're going to add some information to the planet. And in fact, there is some data out there on the website that Nosh has just produced about the seminar, say, and Nosh is using the semantic web user interface of all our dreams, which so he's got his 110-inch gigapixel display, and he's just waving and thinking at it, and he realizes that there's something has been that. He sort of fills in a form. The machine takes him for a conversation about, okay, so you want to organize a seminar. What's it going to be? Is it going to be one day, multiple days? Okay, well, I can see what class of seminar it is. Is it going to have talks? Is it going to have multiple locations? One location? Do you want to have information about local hotels? And then he realizes it's not asking here for some information because it isn't asking for the Northwestern room number, because actually a lot of the ontology it's using come from other, they come from Stanford, and the Stanford people don't use the concept of room number. So basically when he thinks, ooh, I want to tell you something more, there's a sequence that I'd like him to go through. I'd like the thing to prompt him, and he's like, say, okay, I want to tell you something more about this. Okay, do you want to tell me the start time? Do you want to tell me the end time? I can imagine he would get a little form which says start time, end time, who's giving the talk, and when he goes, who's giving the talk, that's easy because he'll say, oh, okay, Tim's giving a talk, and it'll immediately sort of open up and prompt for the normal things about a person. But then he realizes, oh, okay, I want to put this room number in. So it says, it should then come back to him and say, oh, okay. And it should first prompt him with, it's prompted him with the sorts of things which you say about, which the existing data which it knows about. It knows about lots and lots of seminars out there on the web. And so first it prompts him with the ones with data, the sorts of things that people have said about the sorts of seminars that he already knows about. And then it'll go further afield, and it'll maybe look at the ontology, because on semantic web you can go look up any term and you can pull the metadata about it, and with that you will find other terms in the same ontology. And even though none of the talks that Nosh has been to have actually had that, actually some in the ontology there is the projector type. And there is an ontology for saying what type of projector and what type of VGA connection there is. And so it might print him things like that as it tries to extend, tries to help him find things which are available in common languages, different common languages. So then it will go out to, different other ontologies. Then maybe it'll look for very generic ontologies. Or maybe he'll type in room number, and it'll try to find anything to do with rooms out there on the web. And what it ought to do is desperately try to find the largest community out there, which it can express what he wants. So it'll help him. Oh, do you just want room number in general, like the USPS has got a room number? No, not really. No. So, and then it'll say, okay. So they'll come. Okay, I don't think we've found we found an ontology for this NYU room number. So do you want to create a new term? And he'll say, yes, of course. No, I want to create a new term. So okay, what do you want to call it? I want to call it NYU room number. Okay, Nosh. Now, when you want to create a new term, do you want to use this again? Is there any likelihood? Do you want to be able to share this with other people? Who would you want to share it with? Yes, I'd want to share it with other people at NYU. Okay, so shall we put it somewhere? Where do you want to store it? At this point, when you create a new term, there are lots of really big social questions which turn up. And typically, the way computers have worked till now is that they have worked. No, they've worked on desktops, or they've worked within a particular social. They've worked within Facebook, and within Facebook, you can expose things to everybody on Facebook, or to all your friends, or your friends of friends, and you use Facebook for talking about cool things that your friend did. And on Flickr, you've got different systems, but on when you create a new ontology, then there's a certain amount of responsibility there. And you're starting to be part of this big tug of war between the small. So Nosh is making he's creating a new putative group of people who might be interested in this new term. And as he does that, I'd like him to be able to make it available very, very quickly for his own use. But then advertise it to a group. Maybe every time, so actually he's creating, if he hasn't got a new ontology he's already developing, then maybe he's making a new ontology. If he's making a new ontology, you might want to think, okay, that's a group of terms. What sort of terms are we going to put in here? Maybe they are going to be is it going to be a set of NYU specific, Northwestern specific terms, in which case we're going to circulate it all the way around Northwestern, or is it going to be really this is going to be a set of terms which the whole seminar giving community is going to be interested in? Because I'm going to try to avoid that other people reinvent the wheel within that group. So every time I create this ontology, a whole lot of other stuff should get created. Immediately a group should be created. Nosh should decide, or the system will help him decide for him. If you're creating a group, in that case, and you're maintaining an ontology, then you're going to need to decide on the constitution of the creation of this new ontology. People who use the ontology will want to know whether you're promising that it's not going to change. You've created a new term. Is this going to be ontology going to be the ones where you promise you will add terms, but you will never change the meaning? Or is it going to be one of those ontologies where it's up for grabs? I can do it until you've told me you're interested in it, that I reserve the right to change it. Is it going to be one which adopts a W3C standard constitution, so that everybody knows it will go through the W3C. It can be chartered as a W3C working group, so everybody knows what's going on, and they know that some people want to use it when it gets to become a W3C recommendation. So there's masses and masses of social things which are connected with this, and allowing somebody to go smoothly down the road from being somebody who just used to open FileMaker Pro or Microsoft Access and just sort of hurl information or something without any of the semantics being caught, to being somebody who now is actually, every time they put data in, the computer's being as careful as possible to trap the semantics of what they're doing and express each term in a way that's usable by the largest number of people. Now it's moving from just being a computer program which is just sitting there on a desk, just dealing with numbers, to something which is a social program. It's something which is immediately, with each new term that you add, with each new mathematical thing that you do, it's immediately creating the necessary social stuff around it to support it. That's and that's something people haven't done, but darn it, it's something that we do now. Now a lot of the most interesting programs that we write are actually these social programs. Actually, yes, most of the things out there with people that are to do with teenagers exchanging shots, exchanging photographs of each other without any clothes on, and things, things that you might think are in fact a little more frivolous, and that's where the bulk of the really sort of the social interaction is, and of course it's being milked to try and find out what they're interested in, so that they can find out how to target advertising to them and so on. But there is, the fact that now people are used to being given, they're used to being in these social environments where in fact, every time when you put a photograph in, then suddenly there is the concept of all the people who are friends of people who are depicted in the photograph. Suddenly there are implicit social structures. So, and you have the ability really easily to, hopefully on a good day, to create new social structures and so on. I think we should use that. And so in this particular case of just creating the particular very focused case of creating one new semantic web predicate, I think it's a great sort of poster child for a generic problem. If we can do this well, and to take the user by the sticky paw from wanting to just enter data to becoming maybe taking on the job of becoming the curator of a set of new terms, and give them the tools to do that curation, and allow them to then go into all these battles that have to do with the people from Stanford who, in fact, been doing the same thing, but haven't talked to the people from Northwestern, and the negotiation which happens when you realize that there are the same field is actually being covered by two separately growing ontologies. That's this ontology alignment process. Is something which the ontology community has been dealing with for ages. But the interesting part of it is to understand the severely social aspects of it. And in fact, when people build ontology alignment tools so that when you could take the seminar ontology developed at Stanford and take the one developed at NYU, put them together, and if it's a huge ontology, you might get a piece of machine help to try and automatically figure out which of the terms in this language match which of the terms in that language. Well, that's, for most of the ontologies we're dealing with, there's a very small number of terms, and that's not the issue. The issue is managing the social, make it really easy to establish trust between the individuals on either side. Because if you're going to ask these people to stop using their version of room number and start using the one developed at NYU, then we're going to have to change some software. It's going to be a bit of a pain. So they're not going to do it unless they believe that the NYU one is going to stick. Well, it's going to be generally used, and NYU promised not to crow about the fact that now even Stanford is using their talks ontology. So no, it may just be one example from Semantic Web Land, but in fact, I think it's actually the crucial example for Semantic Web Land. The whole reason why it's important to get semantic web technology in, rather than let people continue to build all kinds of weird disconnected databases, is this question. It is the whole issue of that, the fact that you have this way of choosing a new term, new predicate in this way, and that you've got this escalation, steady escalation from choosing it that's going to be used on a scale of 10 to the power 0, just when there's just one person using it, to maybe escalating it until the term is actually used by larger and larger groups. So it's not only a nice example, but it's if you like, it's a critical example. And if we can do that, if we can get people to do that and build tools for them to do that, then we enable the semantic revolution. And all the terms, and of course all the terms people will generate themselves will be parts of other social machines. So it's talking about building these things I call social machines, things where the computer is mediating the interaction between people, but the work is mainly being done by people. But as a result of being connected by the computer, which allows the people to go through particular processes, then in fact the people end up doing a whole lot more. And so Facebook and Flickr allow you to fairly effectively collaborate on figuring out who's in a bunch of photographs. And I'd like to put this up as a next challenge to do really nicely. Obviously, this generalizes if we can produce these social machines which are effective, we need to use them to produce for the huge challenges, which we're not doing very well. The two things that humanity needs to do are decide what to do, and that involves deciding what it believes. And for that, we've used democracy, which was it Churchill said that it sucks that we haven't got anything better, and so we use science, and that also as well. Anyway, it sucks that we haven't got anything better. Imagine having a system where you can't even prove that something's true. But that's science. So we've got science, and we've got democracy, which are these social systems. People are experimenting with new forms of them on the web. Every time now somebody creates something like a new site like Wikipedia, where there is a collaborative creation of knowledge, collaborative curation of knowledge, then they end up creating a new democracy, or meritocracy, or peer review, or they end up creating new pieces of scientific machinery and democratic machinery. And those, of course, so I think in order to actually achieve any form of peace out there, we're going to have to develop some much more powerful forms of democratic machinery and of scientific machinery. We also need to find ways of also getting allowing a person who is learning to understand what to believe, and how to connect to the output of science. It's another issue, to actually believe things that have been produced by the scientific method. So these larger goals of supporting science and democracy are going to be served by machines which will have many of the properties of this thing I imagine for producing a new semantic web predicate. They'll have escalation, they'll have the ability to create new fora every time that they'll have the ability to create fora with a certain amount of flexibility. I would love it to get to the state where, in fact, users have got sufficient flexibility in creating the new machine for a new task without any programming. That that the system is sufficiently malleable and it's sufficient, and you can go meta. And every time you don't like, every time you don't like a form, you can go and edit the form. Every time you don't like the ontology, you can go and add some new terms. Every time you don't like a machine, you can go and change the way it's like an issue management machine, you can go and change the set of states if you actually realize that there's another state that you just stick it in there. So that maybe we'll end up with an ecological system of machines out there, and some really nice democratic machines will end up surfacing. And so that all we have to do as meta engineers is to provide a basic infrastructure at a certain level, and then watch 1,000 flowers bloom of these social machines. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. I think one of the interesting things about the semantic web and the advocacy that Tim has presented us with is it opens up all new avenues of work for social scientists to understand what would be, what are the sort of social systems that emerge when these technologies are engineered the way you described them. We have a few minutes for questions. So, Kati, is someone can, and then we'll come to Jeffrey there.
Thank you. Tim, for those of you which come...
Can you identify yourself, Kati?
Yeah, Kati Borner, Indiana University. For those of you which come from the network science end, could you highlight the top challenges which the web scientists face, and potentially those which are most relevant for this meeting, where we can actually help with? Or maybe those where nobody can help so far. That's fine.
The top challenges for web science. Wow, that's kind of whoa, I need notice of that one. And where then? I think actually in most of the web community, and in a lot of there's a gap. There's of understanding that the main problem that web science has got is people realizing that the web is a large system they study at all. The network scientists know that. But out there, when you look at people doing stuff on the internet, if you look at sort of Silicon Valley startups, they are not doing any. They are doing the only thing when they learn about networking is learning about TCP/IP, and then they go. Then they just let things go. So I think maybe the biggest problem is this gulf. Maybe what the way I'd like network science to move to bridge the gulf from one side maybe is to do more engineering. So rather than just analysis, a lot of the traditional network science is trying to figure out what's going on, and figure out what's going on as though you're trying to figure out what's your molecular biologist is trying to figure out what's going on in a cell. But here, where you can instantly create a new system which can potentially take off virally across the whole web. Every time you analyze the system, like Facebook, just think. I think it'd be interesting for network scientists to get into to become. You can't call them network engineers because that's something else. But if you like, or network scientists doing web engineering, where in the sense that maybe we need to invent a new term for it or something, but it's where as you're analyzing it, you're actually looking at the design decisions that people made in creating that social network that and realize and then trying to figure out how many of those were deliberate to create the overall macroscopic effect and so on. And I don't think you'll even find people creating starting off building a new system, even by specifying at the requirements level, this is the macroscopic effect we want. They'll have a business model, this is how we want to make money. But then actually pushing back to, and the fact that this depends on having an ecosystem, a very, very large number of people doing X, isn't, well, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe people nowadays making startups are better at doing analyzing the motivations. They certainly look at the motivations for individuals doing particular things. The other thing that I don't think anybody's doing out there sufficiently is looking for instability, looking for tipping points like spam, for example, which was a negative tipping point when suddenly the email became unusable. It's not clear. I think there's a sort of duty that the Silicon Valley isn't doing of watching to find out whether it's creating something which will have collapse like the financial system.
I think the semantic web community has been very good in hooking up with companies, with industry, and really doing this merge. And I think network science might need it also.
Jeff. Hi, Jeff Young with the Chronicle of Higher Education. I thought it was a fascinating vision of semantic web, and I know you've been talking about this for a number of years, and so I was very curious about that example, if I understood you correctly, about the cultural challenges, the social challenges, the sort of NYU versus Stanford, and NYU promising not to crow if their taxonomy gets used instead of Stanford, or Stanford starts using it. I wondered if, just sitting here sort of observing it, is there a chance that the vision of the semantic web, as you've outlined it, is it possible that because of social barriers, it's actually maybe never going to happen? Or is that almost, you said it's a critical example, and I think that sort of rings true for me in watching
the reverse.
Some of these
the
cultures.
Reverse. The semantic web is the only thing which can cut through these. Any other, if you use XML technology on each XML, each schema just exists in one community. And that XML document, which is written in a particular format, can't carry any information for smaller communities or for larger communities. So in a way, the semantic web design is designed on understanding of these social issues. And whereas a lot of technologies you try to design things despite those social issues, and you get a set of people to agree on your XML schema. Or on your database schema or something, using offline social tools, and then you end and doing the best you can. In a way, the semantic web suddenly cuts through that and says you don't actually have to get everybody to agree on all the terms. You can pick your battles. And so this is for open government data, for example. This is really important. You can say, you can just put the data out there, and if you don't have a natural government reaction pre-semantic web is we have to wait until we have a standard for everything. So we are going to start the mega national committee for all the standards, and when they're done, we'll export the data. Okay, the semantic web says, no, just export the data. If you see that somebody has generated, so it's, it's very enabling. It cuts through a huge amount of the social issues, in fact.
And so it's possible to do that without the people sort of, I mean, you think it's possible for the system to be developed in such a way that people don't have to be fully in participation in these, in agreeing, that the system can be that smart in doing that. I think it's...
Yes, yeah, you can publish some semantic web data without talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. You can also publish some semantic web data which is understood by everybody in the semantic web community. And in fact, you can publish a file which contains both data at the same time, and that's fine. And in fact, it's the point about the talk was it's kind of optimal, in fact, if you do that. And we need to... okay, so the semantic web it cuts through those previous social tensions.
And so what is the challenge, and it's similar to the last question, what is the challenge of getting to that full vision, of having it be in place? Is it the engineering?
General, slightly off topic, I think. Maybe I'll
okay. Thanks.
I'd like to take advantage of your mind, and I think I need to narrow the frame so you don't have so much room to move on this. So if I could pick up what Katie said in a slightly different way. In organizational studies, this is a very familiar phenomenon. Information is described as sticky, and it doesn't move between the different functions or groups, etc. So that the people who have connections across groups and can move it get a premium in terms of promotions, etc. But there's two pieces they do, and you've captured these beautifully. One is to help one group understand how another one sees things. That's the information piece. That's a relatively trivial piece that I can imagine a semantic web doing very well. But the real piece where the people who are able at this, the piece they contribute is when to make that suggestion and how to frame it so it sticks. It's overcoming the social barrier, as you say. So focusing on the nuance of framing and timing, you're proposing something akin to an Autobot diplomat. And that social piece is very hard to capture. So if I could repeat Katie's question on purely the social piece, how would the semantic web capture the right time to move information and the right frame that's going to convince another side?
But I think it takes a lot of very human qualities to understand what's going on. So I think what the technology would do is to provide a whole set of tools. So for example, if at a certain point, it might strongly suggest that you create a group. But in this particular, but for example, when you create a group, you don't know. Initially, you don't know whether other groups, whether you've missed other groups which are actually trying to do the same thing. Are you reinventing the wheel or not? If you're not reinventing the wheel, it's really you have a completely new product. Then you're going to need a very different social structure to if in fact you are. So what I can imagine doing is looking around at all the tools that people use, all the social tools that people use, and for example, the sorts of meetings that these people who are very good at it will facilitate or be part of, and then characterize those and make those available on the net, because you have to do this all at a distance. And so you build the tools. Now, while you're building, suppose you build tools to support each of those things, and and you don't do them each as a separate PhD project. You build these tools so that so that you can easily move from one to the other. You can easily move from being a closed group to being an open group, or if you find your open group is under attack, to gently closing it up, because so you need to be able to twiddle the knobs. You need to be able to the technology, because you've looked at all these different ways in which people do in fact solve these problems. You've actually got a lot of wisdom there in the system, so that you may want to suggest things to people. So, for example, at an early stage, somebody wants to form a group. It turns out that they've got a rather motley assortment of people who are interested in joining, and they're wondering about whether making it open or closed. You might say, you know what, you don't want to start a group now. Would you like to do a workshop? Supposing you do a workshop, an actual face-to-face workshop. And then we come back, and you come back and look at the charter and use the workshop to produce the charter of the group. That's what we would suggest to people in W3C. So the system could do that. You know, a workshop now becomes an online thing. It becomes an actual event. Well, it's a synchronous event instead of an asynchronous event. It does brainstorming about the charter instead of talking about the actual material. It's sort of at the meta level, and so that. So I love it to embody all the knowledge about the systems which have worked. Allow you to slip between them. I like it to suggest things to you. I like it to help you find people with, if you have a particular skill, to help you realize what other skills you're going to need and find people to fill those and things. But at the same time, I don't want it to embody, to constrain. It also has to be very. Also, I don't want to be closed in the sense that if there's a social machine, some type of social machine, something in that class of workshop group, interest group, forum, focus group, etc., that class of things, if there's one which nobody's invented yet, I want you to be able to implement it as easy as possible.
One last question then. Green, identify yourself.
Thank you. I would like to take again Kathy's, sorry Kathy, remark further. So you were mentioning two values that embed those systems, which is democracy and science. And my question is, most of the people that are using it are not necessarily democratic. On the contrary, we see a lot of inclusion of those systems by other regimes, by other people from all over the world. So basically the planning is very different than the utilization of those systems. And so while the planning might have an idealistic way of thinking about those systems as a more kind of egalitarian and decentralized, eventually the usage might turn to be something very different. And the question is, how do you balance and create accountability and balancing certain kinds of rights embedded in the system to make sure that those systems are not being utilized in, let's say, very different ways than what you've envisioned?
There's an extent to which these systems, like from the internet up, right, can be used in decentralized and democratic ways, and they can be used in centralized ways. But the internet tends to favor things which are decentralized systems. So it's more, if you're going to build very decentralized systems, probably you wouldn't start with the internet. So there's a little bit of bias, but in general, yes, you're right. You can build horribly authoritarian systems. You can build, or if you look at sort of ontology generation systems, you can build a very bureaucratic, top-down committee system using internet tools. In a way, that's why I'm interested. And so in the free, open internet where people are unconstrained, which is really the place I like to spend most of my time, then I'm all for making, as I was just saying, a whole sea of interesting tools, of interesting ways of being of trying to be democratic and trying to blend. One of the parameters actually you find on when you're creating a group is how much power do you give the chair? What do you do with the queen? Does she officiate at ceremonies, or does she actually chop people's heads off if they go out of line? And that's the knob that you can twist. And so Britain is pretty much twisted at one end, and in Saudi Arabia it's sort of near the middle. For instance, that's all these societies are in the process of adjusting, figuring out they're always constantly adjusting those things. So I think, in general, providing people with set of tools, which include tools which are very inclusive, very open, which respect the rights and dignity of every person, is a good thing to do. I think you need lots of different tools. And a lot of the interesting things about this question as to whether to have an open group or closed group, that's not a fundamental. We're not talking about fundamental rights there. We're talking about practical trade-offs. The funny thing about this whole notion of the way you have more or less open or closed groups of different size, that isn't a human rights issue. There are human rights issues. So so you might say that anything to do which is spending taxpayer money, there must be anything that happens. Any of the groups must be transparent. Any taxpayer spending, the groups must be spending. Everybody must be transparent how how they spend taxpayer money. You might say there's a general right to data. Any group which is a government-based group which is working with taxpayer money must provide its data on the web automatically, except when it's personally identifiable information. So yeah, there are rights out there, and there's also, of course, at a more basic level, the fundamental right to connect, which, you know, the right to be on the internet, the right to go to any website you like. So that's the whole, you know, yeah, that's the whole, which I give you a talk for another 45 minutes about that. And in fact, the Web Foundation is looking at whether it's going to a certain extent, start taking up network rights. It's great to see that Estonia and Finland have now adopted the right to connect as being a human right.
We're going to have to cut things down here. I want to again thank both the speakers who did a great job of generating some very, very useful questions up here. So thanks again to Luis and Tim for kicking off this session.